John, and welcome to another episode of Cozy, Charming, Crazy Real Estate, where we talk about everything real estate. Today we're going to talk about selling occupied rental property. It's different from selling a vacant rental property, and it's certainly different from selling a home that is our own residence. And whether you are a owner looking to put a property on the market because you either want to get out of the landlord business, maybe you just want to sell this property, take the equity, put it somewhere else, or maybe if you're just an executor selling real estate that's owned by an estate in probate, we hope this information will be useful to you in either case. So let's go ahead and get started. The 6 topics we're going to discuss are tenants' rights, inspections, documents that you're going to need that are different from just selling a home or selling a vacant rental. We're going to talk about marketing, conducting showings, and transfer, which you can also consider closing the sale, closing escrow. Now, tenants' rights are very important because when we have an occupied property, the tenant's lease is going to continue to be enforced during the sale and actually after the sale. And so that existing list does prevail as something that the tenant can rely on to not get kicked out on the day that the transfer is made. However, the lease can be terminated per the lease, and that is either through the new owner giving proper notice according to the terms of the lease, and also it could be terminated by expiration. If it's a fixed period lease, when it expires, that could be the end of the lease too. Now, the tenant also has the right to not have his rent adjusted on the day that the new owner takes control. Rents must be adjusted per the terms of the lease. They must be given some kind of notice. And if you're in California like we are, there is statewide rent control. So no matter what state you're in, you do need to check to make sure that you are complying, if you're a buyer, with regulations governing rent control in your area, even down to the community level. And so it's very important that we do respect the tenant's rights in everything that we do. So the first thing we're going to do normally is we're going to start off by inspecting the property. We as the seller might do our own walkthrough to see if there's anything obvious that needs to be repaired or could be upgraded at a cost that would allow us to get more than the price or the cost of that upgrade in the sale price. However, when we're working with an occupied property, we need to make sure that we give written notice of entry documents to our tenants, notify them normally with 24-hour notice or greater that we are going to be conducting inspections, or that inspections will be conducted by companies such as termite inspectors, general home inspectors, perhaps plumbers, electricians, roof inspectors, whoever is going to be there. We do need to give our tenants written notice that an inspection is going to take place. And also, if we're going to follow up with any repairs, we need another notice of entry to let the tenants know when repairs are going to be taking place. Now, the documents that we're going to have to provide to potential buyers are a little bit more voluminous than if we were just selling a home. Now, we've started adding in here some yellow lines, and that's going to be what's in addition to normal. Well, normal, if we're selling a home, we're going to provide a title, environmental hazard reports, tax reports, and all of our inspection reports. We would also provide any warranties we have for systems, such as if we still have an existing warranty on a furnace, air conditioner, any of the appliances that would transfer with sale. If we have any manuals for any of those systems, we want to make sure we have those available. Also, if we have had any work done that required a permit, we want to be able to give the buyers copies of those permits. And going along with that, if there were plans generated, I prefer to collect plans that go all the way back to original construction. Those are typically not available, but if they are, it's nice to be able to pass them on to a buyer. But if you had plans for any remodel, those definitely should go transfer or be given to the buyer. Now, since we have a rental property, we want to give a rent roll. We want to give copies of the leases, and if you are have an occupied rental property, instead of giving the leases prior to sale, you might want to, at least in the inspection period, provide the buyer with tenant estoppels. If you're not familiar with estoppels, an estoppel is typically a one-page document that is signed by the tenant that is a summary of the lease. It allows the tenant and the seller to confirm the current rent amount when the lease terminates, when the rent was last changed or raised, and it summarizes the facts of the lease. If you're not comfortable giving that lease, a full copy of that lease to potential buyers. Last thing is notices, and these are very important, especially if you have had issues with a tenant where you've had to give them notices of lease noncompliance. A buyer deserves to know if there are ongoing problems with specific tenants that have required you to give them a notice, and those should be included in your marketing package. If you've had a business license, you want to disclose that. Some communities do not require a business license for even a single rental. Some communities do, so if you do have one, you want to make sure that any buyers know a business license will be required and roughly the cost of it. If you have any maintenance contracts, such like as a written contract, let's say, with a lawn service company that comes and does your lawns on a regular basis. If you have an apartment building, they come and clean all the common areas on an ongoing basis, and that contract is going to be enforced on the day that the sale takes place. The buyer is going to need to know about those. They may want to terminate them and give them notice as the close of escrow approaches, or they may want to renegotiate those contracts, so they need to know about them. If you have insurance, utilities, service and repair bills, all those bills need to be provided, usually going back 12 months. If you're an apartment building, you might want to go back a couple years, but the buyers are going to need to know the operating costs for the building. And those will be summarized in financial operating statements. Typically, if you are selling a single family home, you might not do an operating statement. You might just, for more than 1 year, you might just give the most recent year. If you're selling a multifamily, especially 5 or more unit building, you're going to want to give the last 3 years actual operating expenses in an operating statement, and you'll want to do a pro forma year. In other words, your budget for your current operating year, whether you operate on an annual or fiscal year. Another thing is personal property inventory. If the sale of the property includes anything from a lawnmower to an inventory of spare parts, pool equipment, anything that is not attached, during the marketing period, you're going to want to say what personal property transfers. Now, when we do our marketing, we're going to do a lot more marketing than we would do for a single family home that we're selling, that is our, let's say, our residence. So we're going to definitely ask our broker to put the property in the local multiple listing service, whether it is a single unit, single family home, or multiple units. Definitely you want it in the local multiple listing service. You want to be able to provide in that listing, in the body of the listing, rent and financial information. Most multiple listing services have a form online that you fill out that is equivalent to an operating statement. And then you want to be able to put in the MLS the lease term, or identify the expirations for each of the leases that are currently in place. You will want to have your broker also list your property and investor websites. If it's a commercial property, which is usually considered 5 or more units, you'll want to put it, advertise it in websites such as LoopNet, where commercial buyers often look for property. Instead of doing a brochure or a flyer, you're going to want to do a brochure. And a brochure in the real estate industry, the brokers, when talking to each other, will also call it marketing. A broker will call and you say, oh, do you have any marketing on that? And what that is really a brochure, typically 5 to 10 pages, that contains a lot of information about the property, usually a few pages of pictures, and also the operating statements that we just mentioned a minute ago. You'll also want to check as you're advertising this property to see if you can put a sign out front. Now, in most standard residential leases, there is a box to be checked that says whether or not the tenant, with his rights to occupy the property, also agrees to allow the owner to put a for sale sign or for rent sign out in front of the property. So as a seller, you want to check your lease and make sure that that box has been checked so you don't have any problems with the tenant if you put a sign on there. You also want to add, as a courtesy to your tenant, on that sign, if you're putting for sale, you'll want to put a little rider on that says, please do not disturb the occupants. Now, when you do the showings, I have to start out with this because we are posting this video on March 13th, 2021, and there are a lot of COVID restrictions and regulations in place that govern showing property. And probably one of the most important considerations, at least here in California today, is that you can only have 2 guests come in to see a property for sale, and the owner or tenant may not be present. Only the showing broker or agent and up to 2 potential buyers or people that are in the buyer's family. So no more than 3 people total inside a property. So that is a consideration during your showings. You're going to have to ask the tenants to not be there. To make it convenient and for your tenants, because remember, tenants are customers and customers need to be treated with respect, you do want to request that your tenants do declutter and clean, just as you would a single family home that you're selling, that you live in. But obviously they have a right to live as long as it's sanitary. They do have a right to live as they please, but you can certainly ask them to clean up a little bit. Another thing you can do to respect the tenants' right to occupy the property is reserve blocks of viewing times. Don't just scatter these viewing times all over the place. Try to work out with your broker certain blocks. Tell the tenants about them and say, hey, listen, for the next X number of weeks, we're going to try to schedule showings on these days between these hours. And they can plan their lives a little bit around that. Now, you might not always fill those blocks with appointments, but at least you've warned the tenants about them. Other thing you're going to need to do is, since you are entering, the notice of entry requirement is usually still going to be in place. So whether you deliver that notice of entry by hand, you probably won't put it in the mail, but you might want to work out with the tenant to be able to send that notice of entry via email, so there is a record of you requesting that entry when you do get an appointment. Now, when it's time to transfer the property to close escrow, there's a couple of different things that we do with occupied rental property that we might not do with our home. And the first thing is we want to have the buyer provide a notice to the tenants that they are now the owner. And that does a couple things. Number one, that buyer notice should include the payee and address for where the tenants are to send their rent going forward. It should also include contact information for any maintenance requests or any other requests that the tenants have, and let them know the date in which that change takes place. Normally, buyer notices are done in a week in advance. Sometimes that notice is given cooperatively, where the buyer and seller both sign it so that the tenants know that they're not being hoodwinked by somebody who's just trying to get a hold of their rent but isn't really buying. It's verified by the seller. Regardless, there does need to be a notice no later than the day of close of escrow that informs the tenants of the change. As sellers, it's very important, more than if with a single family home, that you proactively do transfer any maintenance contracts, any ongoing contracts for service or utilities by that close of escrow date, so you are no longer liable for those services. And last thing, of course, is to cancel your insurance as of that date, and make sure that the new owner has started their insurance by that date. So those are the 6 topics that we want to review today regarding selling occupied rental property. I hope if you have any questions or comments, you will leave in the comments below. If you like this video, please like it. And of course, we hope that you will subscribe and join us next week on Cozy, Charming, Crazy Real Estate. We'll see you then.